Hi guys, today we're going to keep reading Maroo of the Winter Caves, but I would like to direct you to how you're going to do it. First, I would like you to listen to it with paper, pencil, and when I ask or when you want, I would like you to pause, take notes, draw. Okay, you can draw, do whatever you want. All right, let's go. Maroo of the Winter Caves. Well, last time we talked about it, last time we read, we stopped where the kids, they saw some people coming and they thought it was the hunters. And they were so excited because they were waiting for them to arrive. So let's see if it was really the hunters who were coming. Chapter 2. The Spring Killing. Otak and Maroo were off like spring hares. Behind them, they heard the furious cries of their little sister, but neither would stop to wait. Can you imagine? Would you wait? I wouldn't. I would be like, no, I want to see Daddy, if I think it's my dad. Women were coming down the lakeside, and they would comfort Nimai. The hunters approached steadily. Otak and Maroo made out the shape of a large animal tied by its feet and hanging between two poles. 4 men carried the poles. The leaders were Tevo and their own father, Areg. They ran faster, delighted to be first to greet the hunters. When they reached them, they stood breathless, unable to speak. Can you imagine how tired they were? And can you imagine, now I want you to write down. On your piece of paper, I want you to write down, what do you think is the animal that the hunters are bringing? In addition to writing it down, I want you to draw it. Draw the animal that you are thinking. Think, is it a small or big animal? What do you think? It said that 4 men carried the poles. So for 4 men, 4 hunters to carry it, do you think it was a small animal? Try to draw the picture of this animal. Tevo said, modestly, "We have not had much luck, just this small animal." Otak and Maroo smiled. They knew that such modesty was feigned. Merely the politeness expected of hunters who have made a magnificent kill. Their father made a joke of it, pretending to stagger under the weight of the beast. The children shouted with laughter, but Tevo gave Areg a disapproving look. Otak signed to the distant group of women who had gathered by the lakeside. He put his hands to his forehead, curving them like horns. Curving them like horns. Can you imagine that? The women knew this meant What do you think it meant? Did you draw the correct one? Did you write the correct animal? It was a bison. They began to move back up the slope toward the cave. Behind Tevo and Areg came the other hunters. Areg's brother, Vorka, carried the spears. Otak chattered to Vorka, and the young man told him about the hunt as they walked back to the cave. Everyone was waiting at the cave mouth. The women helped to lower the great animal onto the flat ground outside the cave, and immediately began flaying it with sharp stone knives. Now I want you to picture that scene. The cave, the knives, and I want you to draw it. What does it look like? Pause this video and draw it. Blood was collected in a bowl made from a deer's skull. and passed around for the hunters to drink. Old Mother, meanwhile, had made the fire hot and was giving drinks of herb-flavored water to the women and children. One of the elders, Kiriatek, brought out a small drum and began to tap a rhythm. The women sang as they worked. Maroo and an older girl were given stone scrapers and set to cleaning every scrap of flesh from the flayed skin. It was hard work, but they joined in the singing and thought of the feast to come. Do you think they were excited? I would. The liver and other parts were cut out and eaten raw. But the children had none. The hunters came first. What about you? I want you to write down. Have you ever eaten something like that, livers? Have you ever eaten something different? What was the most unusual food you have ever eaten? I have eaten alligator's meat. I think that was the most unusual. I have eaten liver also, but not raw. In Brazil, we eat liver, steak. Yeah, we make like steak, fried steak of liver. So the hunters came first. Why do you think the hunters came first? Why do you think the hunters had to eat before everybody else? Before long, the carcass was jointed, and chunks of meat were stuck on sticks and roasting over the fire. Fat splashed, sizzling into the flames. Maroo, still scraping at the hide, felt limp with hunger. Can you imagine how hungry she was? At last, enough meat was cooked for the feast to begin. Old Mother called everyone to stop working and come to eat. Yeah, finally! Maroo had handed a meaty bun. It was a hot, very hot bun. It was so hot she almost dropped it, but she was too hungry to care about getting burned and began tearing all the hot flesh with her teeth. The feast lasted all day. They did not eat all the time, but stopped to talk and sing and tell stories. The hunters were tired and stretched, yawning by the fire, but Nimai made sure her father did not fall asleep. She climbed onto his knees and giggled as he tossed her about and fed her tidbits. Vorka smiled quietly at Areg's games. He lived in his elder brother's shadow. Soon, Vorka slipped away to the back of the cave and came back with Areg's drum. He offered it to his brother, who was a renowned drummer. I wanted to pause there and write down. Answer this question. Have you ever played the drums? Do you play any musical instrument? Nimai squealed as Areg swung her down and took the drum. He began to experiment with the rhythm. The small drum was made of hide stretched over bone and decorated with fox fur pompons on thongs that spun outward as Areg tossed and caught the drum and tapped a complex rhythm. Everyone began to clap and sing. Can you imagine what they were singing? I'm not gonna sing because I'm a terrible singer, but you can sing there. What were they singing? Thinking about. What were they singing? Many hours later, they were still eating. The drum and voices were silent. The fire had dimmed to a warm glow. All around the outer cave, people lay on the stone hearth seats or on skins on the floor. The hunters had fallen asleep. Nimai, lolling on her mother, was sucking her thumb and twisting a greasy finger in her hair. Why was her finger greasy? Can you imagine why? Write it down. Why do you think Nimai's finger was greasy? Maroo curled up on the floor and soon fell asleep. She woke to the chattering of women as they cleared away the bones from the feast. It was morning. Old Mother was heating her stones in the fire and pining up her hair with carved bone pins. Maroo yawned and sat up. Old Mother said, "Today we leave for summer hunting." Maroo scrambled eagerly to her feet. Her first thought was for her treasures. She ran into the inner cave and reached up to a hole in the rock. Why do you think she went there? What do you think she was going to grab? What do you think she was going to take to the hunt with her? The wall next to the hole was marked with a scratched outline of ptarmigan, the bird she was named for. She pulled out necklaces, a skin of bag full of shells and bone beads. A reed whistle. She put all the necklaces over her head. Already hanging from her belt was a skin bag containing stone knives, a sharp one for cutting, a flaying knife, a scraper, and one for boring holes. That's a lot. Can you imagine that? In another bag, she carried bone needles and sinews for sewing and, most important of all, a bow drill for fire making. The inner cave was almost empty. It looked strange with all the fur bedding gone. The tribe had few possessions and could break camp easily and quickly, even after the long cold. The men would carry their sledges and snowshoes only for 3 days. Then they would leave them hidden in a cleft of rock at the crossing place of the Deer and the Great River to await the people's return at the onset of winter. Everyone carried something. Only the hunters would travel light. Now I would like you to write on your piece of paper, why do you think the hunters would travel light? And you can pause this video to answer your question. Now I'm going to give you the answer. Are you ready? Let's see if you got it correct. Everyone carried something. Only the hunters would travel light, to be ready with sling or spear wherever the chance arose. The chance of hunting some prey. The women and girls would carry babies and backpacks or furs and clothing. Strong younger women without children would carry on their backs the bundles of heavy hides for covering shelters. Tikek, Maroo's mother, was in the sleeping place, shaking out furs. She said, "Help me roll this." Maroo picked up a wolverine fur. It smelled musty when she shook it. "Mother," she pleaded, "can we go to the sea this summer?" Tikek straightened up, tossing back her long black hair. She was expecting a baby in the summer, and already it was beginning to show. She put a hand on her belly and smiled and said, "This one will decide what we do." Why do you think she said that? Why do you think that the baby would decide? Why do you think maybe they would be able to go to the sea or not? I want you to pause and answer this question. And Maroo had to be content with that. She found her brother on the edge of a circle of men. They were drawing maps in the ash with a piece of bone and talking about the roads they might take when the tribe split up into smaller groups for the summer. Maroo peered at the pattern of lines. She could recognize the home cave and the lake on the ice river, and south of that the great river with the shallow crossing place where the deer converged into autumn. A rag was pointing to the trail that curved in a huge arc around the foothills of the White Mountain to reach the plain on the far side. A much shorter trail crossed the White Mountain itself, but no one had used it for many years. There were cave lions there and dangerous glacier, but it was the spirits that the tribe feared the most. Can you imagine? They feared spirits. What about you? Do you fear spirits? Do you think they exist? Old Mother, who had climbed the trail long ago, believed that the mountain spirits were unfriendly to people. And Tikak said that she never felt easy until they were well past the mountain and out on the open plain. Otak whispered to Maroo, "I wish we could take the White Mountain Trail. I want to see the cave lion. But remember, that's dangerous because of the spirits." Maroo shivered. She had never seen a cave lion, but she had seen their bones, and she knew what they were like. Huge, tawny animals standing almost shoulder high to a man, with long, cruel teeth and claws that could kill a hunter with one swipe. "I don't want to see one," she said. And yet she knew it was not the thought of the lions that gave her that strange feeling whenever the tribe passed the White Mountain. It was the spirits. She did not know what a spirit was. She had often asked the adults about them, but no one could ever tell her. She sensed that the spirits were something much more to be feared than wild beasts. What about you? Can you imagine that? Can you imagine these spirits that she was afraid of? I would like you to pause this video and draw these spirits now. Yet, mixed with her fear of the mountains was curiosity. Why shouldn't people cross it, and what would happen to them if they did? Chapter 3. On the Great Plain. Arag shaded his eyes against the early morning snow dazzle on the plain and stared at the distant line of hills. "There," he said, pointing. Maroo squinted. Faint against the faraway gray rocks, she saw a dark vertical line. She knew what it was. A wooded gorge. There they would find trees for building a firewood, green food to eat, and fresh water from the hills. Such places were rare, but the people knew them all. They were long past the White Mountain now, and out on the Great Plain. The plain was a vast, flat expanse, marshy in places and covered with moss, and stunted trees that grew no higher than Maroo's boots. It looked empty, yet Arag had navigated it and brought them within sight of the camping place he remembered. It took them half the morning to reach the gorge. They were a smaller group now, only the two hunters, Arag and Vorka, Old Mother and her daughter, and the 3 children. The tribe had broken into several groups, one going up into the hills, another staying to fish by the shores of a lake. but all moving slowly northeast in the wake of the deer. Food was so abundant in summer that it was not necessary to travel in large groups. The young men were glad of the chance to lead, and everyone was glad to be away from the quarrels and closeness of the cave. As they walked, the familiar deer smell came to them on the wind. The reindeer passed farther to the north, following their ancient trails. The ground vibrated constantly under their hundreds of hooves. Sometimes a herd of bison or a mammoth would appear in the distance, and sometimes they saw rival predators, wolves, wild dogs, or a lone wolverine. Can you imagine these animals? Have you ever seen one? I want you to pause this video and answer this question. Have you ever seen any of these animals? Wolf? I've seen a wolf. No, actually I saw a coyote and I thought it was a wolf. I was very scared. Wild dogs or a lone wolverine. Have you ever seen them? Near the entrance of the gorge, they found the skeleton of a horse, picked clean by scavengers. Inside the gorge was a different world, green and rippling with bird song. Water came sparkling down from a spring in the hills above. There were willows growing by the stream, and a small grove of birch close against the steep rock face. They all ran to the stream and drank, then sat down to the rest of the rocks and shared chunks of cold deer meat. Have you ever had deer meat? I've never had it. If you have, can you pause and write down what it tastes like? Pause this video and write. Tell me what it tastes like. When they had eaten, the men began discussing where to build a hut. The children wanted to help, but old mother said, "We must find fresh food." Maroo brightened. Green food was welcome after the long winter months of nothing but meat and stored nuts. She fetched the grass bags the women had woven during the winter. These had long hardless that could be carried over the shoulders, leaving the hands free to dig and scrape. There were bone-digging sticks and sharp flint cutters for each person. Maroo handed out the bags, one each for herself and Otak, a tiny one for Nimai, and a larger one or larger ones for her mother and grandmother. The men had already begun digging the base of the hut, close under the rock overhang. This was the hardest part of the work. They grunted as they swung the sharp antler picks. But for all their efforts, they were scarcely breaking the surface of the ground. Wow, that's tough. Which was still rock hard under the melting snow. Ugh, that's not good. Old Mother led her party deep into the wooded gorge, and the rhythmic sound of the picks gradually faded. The snow higher up the slopes was beginning to melt and run in rivulets and small streams down the sides of the hills, forming a lush, marshy woodland at the bottom. They found blue flowers with long, wet green leaves. What do you think those blue flowers were? Can you imagine? I want you to pause this video and write down. What do you think they found? Blue flowers with long, wet green leaves. What do you think it is? Do you think it's a fruit? The leaves were tough, but when the plant was dug up, it yielded a soft white root that was good to eat. Maroo ate several, enjoying the fresh, earthy taste. Nimai came and helped with her own little digging stick, As they jabbed their sticks into the soft earth, beetles and worms were disturbed. Nimai caught a beetle and put it into her mouth. Oh no! Can you imagine that? Have you ever eaten a beetle? Huh. That really sounds weird. But it was hard and bitter, and she spat it out. Maroo laughed, just as I am laughing now. Maroo laughed as she tossed roots into her bag. Beetles are no good to eat, she said. Find some grubs. Maroo put up her head and sniffed the air. The gorge was full of damp, woodsy smell. Moss and crushed leaves, the tang of the white roots and the crumbly earth, and mixed in with all this, Maroo thought she detected a faint smell of gold. I smell grubs, Nimai declared confidentially, and trotted off. Maroo laughed. Grubs have no scent, she called. But a few minutes later, she heard Nimai squealing, Grubs! Grubs! Quick! Maroo jumped up. Nimai was poking at a piece of rotting wood with her stick and popping things into her mouth. Everyone came running. Out of the soft, crumbled wood, fat white grubs were scurrying in all directions. Quick hands snatched at them. Maroo grabbed and ate the grubs as fast as she could. They were soft and juicy, with a sharp taste. Nimai laughed to see them run. When the excitement was over, Old Mother said she had seen some bushes with sweet leaves higher up one of the sides of the gorge. They followed her out of the wet valley bottom into more open area below the snow line. They picked busily. Tikek, who was tired because of the coming baby, stayed with Old Mother on the lower slopes, but the children climbed higher, scrambling over rocks and finding insects under loose stones. The goat smell was stronger here. Have you ever seen a goat? You know, my father in Brazil, he has a farm, a small farm, and there are goats there. People eat goat's meat also, but I've never eaten. A scatter of falling stones made them look up in time to see the rump of an ibex disappearing behind the rocks higher up. Otak's eyes sparkled, and his hand moved instinctively to his small spear. He knew he could never catch an ibex, but he could not resist chasing them. The ibex were so beautiful. Two more heads appeared, their heads crowned with thick, ridged horns curving back in a perfect arc. Now I would like you to pause this and try to draw this animal. Can you picture it? Can you imagine it? The children stared. The goats stared merrily back. The children scrambled up the slope, and the ibex clattered a little higher. The children moved again, and again the ibex climbed higher. Nimai laughed. She loved chasing things. But then the two older children, caught up in the fun of the chase, climbed swiftly up the steep hill, and out of their sight, the goats leaping away ahead of them. Can you imagine running and trying to chase all these animals? Nimai could not follow and went back, wailing to her mother. Otak and Maroo stopped, panting at the top of the hill. The wind hit them as they reached the summit, almost knocking them over. They crouched for shelter behind a rock. The hilltop was bare and cold, scattered with outcrops of gray rock with large drifts of snow, where the sun hadn't yet ventured. There was nothing here to put in their bags. Let's go back, Maroo said. It's cold. But Otak had heard something. He signaled to her, "Shh." He just sighed. Maroo listened. Between the loud gusts of wind, she heard a high, faint whimpering, like that of an animal in pain. The children looked at each other. Both were curious. Maroo sighed, "Let's find that." They crept forward. Otak held his spear at the ready. And that's the end of chapter 3. What do you think it is? What do you think is this sound? I want you to write your answer.